Hello, psychology students. This is Professor Zeeb, and welcome to another short audio-visual lecture. This time, we're going to discuss something called the gene-environment correlation model, also known as the reciprocal model, to explain the interaction of genetics and environmental events. This one's going to be a little bit different than the previous theory that was discussed, okay? And this is a more modern, current view of this. And it's pretty simple to understand. So basically, with this model, they're going to purport that people have a genetically determined tendency to increase the probability that an individual will experience stressful life events. In other words, there may be multiple genetic factors that all contribute and influence each other to the point where it may create a situation where a person develops a disorder or some type of problem. So let's give you an example to kind of explain what we mean. So in class, we've been talking about this case of the blood injury phobia. So we're going to use that as an example. So let's say there's an inherited tendency or a genetic factor related to developing a blood injury phobia. And we also know that things like personality, behaviors, thinking styles can also be influenced by genetics. So, as an example, let's say that this person has also inherited the personality factor of being impulsive. So, part of their personality is as that they're an impulsive person, which theoretically comes from genetics. Okay, so let's take a look here. So once again, if you're more a visual person, this will kind of help. So if we look over here, person on the left here, person A has a genetic vulnerability to develop the actual phobia, but they've also inherited the tendency to be impulsive. So they have two factors that are interacting and making the situation lean towards the phobia. Because, for example, you could argue that impulsive people may have a tendency to rush or putting themselves at risk of getting in an accident, like a car accident, for example, and thus making it more likely that they would actually see blood or be in that situation. And thus, that's what triggers the phobia. So, once again, if you look over on the left here, we see that this person has an inherited tendency to develop the phobia. They've also inherited the personality trait of impulsiveness. Uh, Once again, as a result of having that personality trait, they may be putting themselves in a situation where blood is more likely to happen, and thus that all interacts and reciprocates and leads to a full-blown blood injury injection phobia. Person on the right, however, person B here, does not have that inherited tendency, but maybe, they're involved in situations where they see blood, like a medical professional, for example. But this does not necessarily turn into the actual phobia because they don't have the genetic tendency. So I guess the point is that through a combination of inherited factors, this may change their lifestyle or what they're exposed to theoretically in life, and thus setting them up to a certain extent to develop that actual problem. Another example would be something like depression and certain personality factors. Let's say the person's inherited, the tendency to become depressed, but they've also inherited certain personality factors that cater to that. This person may actually seek out difficult relationships or circumstances that actually lead to depression. And so because they have all of that, together, it makes it more likely for them to happen. So we've discovered that many problems show connections to these multiple factors, making it more likely for the person to be exposed to something which actually triggers the problem. So this theory, this model has been applied to many areas, including depression, things like divorce, and certain personality characteristics. And so we know that this theoretically could contribute to different problems. So hopefully that made it clear for you and you can kind of understand the difference between the different models that we've discussed. So please move on to the next step in the class.